faces.
Fresh faces for some, yeah. Old friends for others. So, Sarah, I've been in the modeling industry for 32 years, and along the way, we've always wondered, Google, with all this incredible information, why wasn't it doing anything around data hazards, all the rest of it? And you've launched Bellwether out of Google X. And I'm just going to read you back your tagline so you can explain what this actually means. So, the first prediction engine for the Earth and everything on it. What does that mean for insurers?
I know, it's the context. Taken out of context, it sounds just awful. But so here's the context. I'm part of a group within the Alphabet ecosystem called X. It's also been called the Moonshot Factory. It was set up by Larry Page and Sergey Brin 12 years ago with the idea that it's very hard to innovate in big companies. They thought search wouldn't stick around forever. It would be replaced, so have a place that can go generate these new ideas. And in this environment, you always have to just describe all the things you build in just massive terms. So you can't just say, oh, I'm going to go build a really good wildfire model. You have to say, I'm going to organize all of the world's Earth information and make it easily accessible. You know, you have to just aim for this. So part of our story is trying to align with the Google moonshot thesis, which is what would it look like if you made an entire dashboard for all the Earth? Much less a workbench, right? What if there's a workbench for the Earth and all of its data? That's the idea, but that's from the X perspective. But I think you're asking a really good question around why Google is doing this now and why we built a wildfire model and heatwave and these other. And I think the truth is because it's just took kind of an entrepreneurial perspective, which is really hard to do in big companies. But when I came in, I really sort of said, you know, a couple things. One, I was interested in climate. I was interested in the challenges of climate. And the minute you go talk to people who think about pricing the future, it's insurance, risk transfer. And they all say, you know, we don't really think about climate. It's too far in the future. It's too hard to price right now. This was 4 or 5 years ago. And I said, well, you know, so what about climate do you think about? And they all said, well, it's the severe weather manifestations of climate that are interesting. What's happening next year and the next 5 years? These kind of medium-term or more recent events. And then I said, what's the hardest? And at the time, people said wildfire is really hard. So if you look at what underpins wildfire, it's information about vegetation, weather, terrain. And those are all places where Google has an unfair advantage. So that, as an entrepreneur, is exactly where you should go, right? Where do you have a right to win in a place where other people would have a very hard time winning? Because it's true, I mean, even though we're Google, you know, it's not like we would do a better job than Uncork in building that software, necessarily, right? But I do think because we're Google, we'll do a better job building a wildfire model. And so that's why you go after it. The other good thing is I'm in such a small division that no one even cares about us. So no one even paid attention, you know? And also because it's insurance, it's so unsexy that everyone would also looked away. They were almost embarrassed for me, you know? Like, I can't believe she has all these things she could build and she's working in insurance, you know? And I liked that because, you know, it's fun to be contrarian but right, and it's also really important to do one thing well to get credible. So even though wildfire isn't the world's most enormous market and so forth, you know, to do something very well and to solve a problem in the insurance industry that they pay attention to, it brings credibility and gives you an opportunity to build more and more. And I think it's been great for Google too, because now Google can come and talk more very specifically about something we're doing to help the industry and to help the whole market understand this peril.
Wow, there's so much in there. What we didn't tell Robin, actually, is that timer, we actually built some extra time into the discussion.
You know
No, don't apologize, because we've actually designed it so we had more time than... so
maybe they all want to take a break.
No, it's 4 o'clock for the break. There's not going to be any drinks ready until 4 o'clock.
Okay, good.
But Sarah, I want to take a step back, actually. So if I look at your LinkedIn profile, you've done all sorts of incredible things. I think you're a doctor, you're an assistant professor. So you did all that stuff, and then you decided, hey, you know, where I'm really needed is in insurance. So what was it that took you from that side of the world to coming into Google X and doing your insurance mission?
Well, it's probably less about the discipline, more about liking 0 to 1. So I like going from totally ambiguous, nothing there, to something. So that's, I think, a skill set. I think if we didn't call it entrepreneurship, many more people would do it. I think entrepreneurship is really loaded, especially outside the US. It's associated with a certain person, a certain age, a certain type. And I think it's just someone who likes and can tolerate ambiguity and then deliver against it, which I think is probably in everybody's organization here. You can think of somebody who is very good at a totally open-ended question and then delivered against it. Like, those are technically entrepreneurs, right? The other thing about that I would say that I really like doing is figuring out product market fit. Because it's much easier to do as I get older, because I'm much more humble and much more willing to realize how important it is to keep learning, and refining. Because when I was younger, I was like, wow, everybody's wrong. You know, like you just kind of go through the world like, they only knew what I knew, right? But then as I get older, I'm like, oh wow, these people know their business so much better than I do, and they're giving me really good feedback. And like, why don't I take that feedback? So that's the other nice thing is actually entrepreneurship gets easier as you get older because you just get better at learning and you get like learn faster. So I like that a lot. I like that whole, and I think if we didn't call it entrepreneurship, more people would probably identify that as that kind of person. Like I like 0 to 1.
Well, actually, I've got a theory on innovation, which is quite similar, which is innovation is what happens when you can't find any other way to do it. It's quite scary. And so that kind of puts people off. So I think there might be a link to that. But you didn't quite answer my question about medical to insurance. So did you just decide that insurance was just so difficult, for you wanting to crack that problem? That they so desperately needed help. That was where you had to go and help the world? Or what was it that took you to that?
Well, no, I got to insurance via climate. And from my perspective, climate was easier to innovate around than healthcare in America.
Okay.
So... the climate crisis, that's just far easier than trying to make anything better in American healthcare. So I was like, let's do that. I'd been at it for 10 years and I was like, this sucks, so truly. But then once you get climate, it's so painful because that's the other part about climate I discovered very soon. It's so hard to make money in climate, just like in healthcare, right? So hard. And so then I was like, well, who's paying for any of this? And it turns out insurance. Insurance is paying for it. So then you just go in that space, right? Insurance does care, So, and that's actually very exciting too. I think is such an opportunity in the insurance space is that this has been your job for all time, is to price the future and price the probability of event in the future. And I think it's well, how do we just provide information so that you put a better price on it? And if you can price it, well then, wow, if we could price the probability of this climate event, then a lot of people would pay attention. And if that kind of thing.
You've just made about 75% of the people in this room happy because they think, day job's hard being in insurance, but crikey, at least I'm not in the medical world. So,
so
I want to come back to climate because there's a really important distinction, I believe, but I know, on climate as you talk about it. So there's a kind of the timeline that insurance thinks about, which is generally 1 year. And then you've got the climate issues that are happening more slowly, but still definitely happening. So in your mind, you mentioned both of those, but do you make a distinction when you think about building your wildfire models between the 12-month period, which also has got some sort of natural volatility in it, versus the longer-term climate issues?
Yeah. So I think it's helpful to just take the long-term stuff when it comes to day-to-day business and just park it, because it's just hard to imagine how are you going to incorporate a climate model scenario into your business? The error bars like this, and it's 150-kilometer resolution. It's just hard, right? But there are ways to think about climate in the here and now that's very relevant to that long term, which is a few things. One is, just to get our minds away from the idea that we're going to innovate our way to climate success or climate, no. In fact, we just need to figure out a way to maintain the planet. So how do we maintain the planet? Well, maintaining the planet means we adapt better to everything that's happening. So how do we adapt better to everything that's happening is we understand what's going on right now really well. And because of that understanding, we make adjustments, right? And insurance can help provoke that by pricing things and then asking people to make changes in order to keep them insured. This is actually a great thing about wildfire is that you can actually modify wildfire risk if you change vegetation patterns. And that's an adaptation and mitigation strategy that's very much going to be required going forward into the future for climate. So what's exciting to me is what if insurance got involved in the business of helping people adapt or mitigate, right? And if that starts happening, then this becomes a sort of piece of risk transfer. It becomes a way in which people stay in the insurance market. And then that becomes something we do in many other spheres related to property and so forth. Unfortunately, I think this is what's so cool about parametric and really hard. I can't believe I'm talking about parametric because everybody here knows more about it than I do. But I was just very interested in this parametric product that went out in the Bay Area around flood. And after a bunch of, this was the only insurance policy they had, but after everyone got on board with their parametric product, they all moved their valuables to the second floor. And everybody totally changed the way they were living in their homes, because they were like, I'm going to protect my assets, and I'm only going to get a payout if it hits this, so I don't want to lose stuff, right? But the behavior changed because their way that they were managing risk changed. So that's interesting to me, right? That's a piece that's really critical to climate, is like teaching people to be more resilient, encouraging them and incentivizing them to adapt. That, to me, is the climate story.
You're
right?
you're so much more honest in the US. I mean, there's and we'll come back to parametric, because I don't want to exclude those people who don't know what parametric means. In the UK, there are instances where people get flood warnings and they actually move their possessions downstairs and they get flooded and then they claim against them. So you should take some heart from the honesty of your US. So parametric, for those that don't know, is essentially an insurance payout based on a physical index being, it's called triggered. So if you're talking about flood, it could be depth of water. Talking about hurricane, it could be wind speed. We're going to be hearing from Safe Hub about some things we're doing with earthquake. So something else you mentioned in there, Sarah, and you did say we could get a little bit off script, so I'm going to come back to you. You mentioned in passing there that part of the way of mitigating, reducing the wildfire risk is to do with, if I interpret this correctly, changing the vegetation. So that's kind of long-term impacts. You're basically saying if you grow things differently around population houses, that's going to reduce the wildfire risk. Is that what you're saying? That you want to influence what people are planting or not planting?
No, actually, much more short-term. Just mow down or clean vegetation and thin out trees in very specific places, or do a controlled burn. So there's a Western state that we just signed a deal with, in which they're using our model. They have a budget of $25 million to manage some number of acres across the high wildfire areas, and they've been going through and thinning all these areas, and then they used our model, and we said, actually, no, these are the areas you should be mitigating. So the state has given them a budget and said, take care of your land in this way, and we said, well, look at our map, and then, of course, back to the point that came up with Indico, which is explainability, right? Our model says, choose this because, this area is high risk because of the following reasons. So there's a transparency there too. So I think that's exciting, right? Because people are trying to change the land right now, make wildfire risk make it less likely to be catastrophic. And you do that by controlled burns, thinning, various strategies. And where you do that, if you've got 2 million acres to manage, but you only have a budget for 300,000, you better pick the right 300,000. So that's the idea.
So what happens in places like California, where insurers are withdrawing because they're required to give wildfire risk? The insurance commissioner is trying to find a solution. Do you see you've got a role for sort of helping in that midpoint between things at risk of becoming uninsurable? You've got regulation. You just given up on it? No,
I mean, from your lips to God's ears. I mean, I've tried so hard to get into California, and it is like, it's the world's 8th largest economy, and it is so hard. If anyone has any ideas.
You live there, don't you? So that's
exactly. It doesn't. So no, there is so many entrenched interests who are already players, and it's just hard. So the good news is I think the withdrawal of the insurance companies has really compelled the governor to say, whatever you're doing, Mr. Lara, the commissioner, to understand and make it easier for insurance companies to do business here is not working. And you have to start listening to them about the way they do this. And I think what I would love is if we could somehow be a source of ground truth, or one compelling source of ground truth that helps everybody decide and think about the underlying risk in a more straightforward way. Because right now, the actual maps that are designed in California are totally politically motivated. Like real estate agents will come in and be like, that's not that high. And then all of a sudden the risk becomes low. You know what I mean? It's like it's an insane system. But in California, it would be great, because I think part of the story too in California is, California has somehow convinced homeowners that if you trim the vegetation around your land, your premiums will go down. And it's like not even close. Like, we're just trying to keep you insured. So that's the other story. It's not one in which I'm also saying, wow, we can tell you that your wildfire risk is lower. In fact, we're saying that the risk is so high in some places that it literally doesn't matter what you do to your house. It matters what's happening on the outskirts of your community. That's a very politically tough story to tell people, because this is where all their wealth is, especially at that wildland-urban interface. So it's not like I don't have empathy for what a hard thing that is to hear. So that's part of where the delicacy of sort of how do we support these people who are finding out that they saved all this money, all of their retirement is in this home in the WUI, and now it's unsellable because no one will insure it. So that part of that story is, and well, then again, can we go in and help them manage that risk, lower the risk in some ways, and so forth. So that's the California story.
Good. Well, you wanted a tough job, so it's definitely giving you some challenges. So, and as you actually offer your solution out to the insurers, so there have been we talked about ecosystems before. There are modeling companies that have been out there for 30 years, providing data. Insurance companies kind of got their workflow. So you come along as Google. You've got some really smart people building the models. You're well known, but how do you actually how do you help the insurer actually use it day to day so that when they're making decisions, they can easily get access to your data?
Yeah, it is what I think about every day. It's the most important because it's a very cool model, but if no one's using it, it's useless and not important. So right now we deliver an API and we work with partners because even though we're Google, my team has no real commercialization arm, so we try to distribute through partners. And with those partners, we largely just deliver an API that returns a score. Very importantly, it's a score that's a number, a probability between 0 and 1, not a low, medium, high. Already on the path to pricing, right? It's much easier to price 0.2 as opposed to low. You know, I mean, these are important things we're doing. But that strategy of getting that real number score is very important to helping someone understand, is this a surcharge situation? Is it a non-renewal situation? Is it an insurable situation? I think that's much easier if we give someone an absolute probability as opposed to a relative one. But right now we deliver it via an API, but with partners. So partners who are more credible in the insurance space technically have helped us. We're partnered with Swiss Re, helping through there on the reinsurance side, but we're just always looking for other places to get in the market. And we think through partnership. I mean, ecosystem is one way to do it. I think partnership is another way because lots of people have already built all of this fantastic technology, and we haven't. So what we have is, and we're making a contrarian bet because everyone else has decided to build all the models. And we're building one model at a time and trying to make it best in class. And I'm not sure that's the right strategy, but for now we're sticking with it because we have to make sure everything we build is worth the investment.
No, I think it's a great strategy. I love the way you've told the sort of Google people that are paying the bill that you're going to be like a prediction engine for the world, but you've figured out the reality. The way to get into the insurers is to have the humility to say, I'm not going to build you another tool or platform. I'm just going to give you the API. So be pretty sad if Google couldn't give you the API, and you're going to partner. I mean, that to me is just like such an important way to be able to get in. So yeah, no, I think Sarah, I think you've actually chosen the right path.
Well, thank you for saying that.
So
I've been actually wondering. So thanks.
Well, that's just my view, but there's many more people here that've got a better opinion than I do. And then so you've got wildfire, and then you've also been looking at a way of looking at post-loss claims assessment or catastrophic losses. Can you just talk a bit about that?
Sure. This was actually very exciting. We threw our hat in the ring for DoD, Department of Defense in the U.S., put out a call for prototypes. They collect aerial images after natural disasters, fly planes back and forth, collect a bunch of images, and the images are off nadir, which means they're coming in at an angle like this, not straight up and down. And they're not geolocated or referenced, so you know where the plane is, where the camera is, but you don't know what they're looking at. So right now, after disaster, the National Guard has humans look at each image and determine what's been damaged and not damaged. And that probably takes between 12 and 24 hours to process and understand this school's out, this critical infrastructure needs repair, we can evacuate people here. So what we built using this underlying geospatial technology that powers the wildfire tool is something that takes in all of those aerial images and very quickly understands where they are in space using magic. It's very cool. And then once we understand where it is in space, we sort of simulate a 365-degree picture of the area and then do a matching algorithm. So if I know I'm here, I could be looking anywhere in space here, so then let me, with that image, find exactly what's most likely to be there, and then I can tell you that school's 50% damaged, that road is completely out, this bridge is out, that kind of thing. So that now takes us about a minute or two. So they go from 12 hours to a minute or two. And it's all aerial images, which is very useful. It's generated by volunteers, the Civil Air Patrol. And that's also a very convenient kind of API situation. They load a bunch of images into a bucket. We process and push it back into ArcGIS for them. And that I love that product because this is one situation in which the product market fit is like, mwah. Like we go out and we show it to people and they like eat the dog food. They're like, we'll take all the bugs. We need this so badly. And that feels awesome. Like the customers on the receiving end of this love this technology. And that is great because they deal with all sorts of technology. I mean, that I think is really would be great too if we ever figured out something that made an underwriter feel like their job was like somehow, like they just were doing all the other things they wanted to do more. This is what we're all talking about. But when you do that for a customer, it feels awesome because, you know, yeah, they're just forgiving in there.
Great. Well, look, I'm glad we're ending on a high note.
Yeah.
So one final question before we all break up. So what else in your Earth prediction engine are we looking out for in 2024? Any sneak previews?
Yeah, I was just actually talking to somebody about this here at the conference. I missed Nigel's keynote because he introduced me to said person. Sorry, Nigel. But I was talking to somebody, actually, I think we've figured out a way to work with the underlying geospatial data much more quickly to make it more ML ready, which is really wonky software engineering, but again, delivering geospatial data via API in a format that drops in as easy as like an Excel spreadsheet. That's the idea. So if we're in an ML AI era, and you know, PDFs aside, the challenge is, you know, how do you get really disparate data sources coming from all sorts of different satellites, all sorts of different images? How do you get them all to be sort of aligned, reprojected, cleaned up, sorted, such that this lat long has every single relevant piece of information about the natural world or the built environment organized right there? So that technology is a software play. It's just a software infrastructure play that we can deliver via API. But I think we're going to go live with that with some partners and customers. It's very wonky on the data science end, very much geospatial heavy, but I think it's going to be really important to make all of this information about the planet ML ready. Very little right now touches ML, and we want to make that more ML ready.
Machine learning, for those that don't know that.
Sorry, machine learning. Machine learning, yep.
Sarah, you're going to be hanging around for a bit longer? You're going to miss more of Nigel's presentations, or are you going to be, people want to talk to you the
There
break?
he is. I'm just going to follow him. No, I'll be here this afternoon. And
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
That was great. Thank you.